Hello, I want to welcome you everyone today, let you know you're in the right place. Going to allow about another minute to get folks settled in before we get things going, but we thank you for joining us. Again, thank you for joining us today and welcome. Going to get things going in about 30 seconds from now. Okay, an official hello everyone and welcome to today's Safety and Health Magazine webcast, Getting Past Semantics of Safety 1 and Safety 2, Leading Safety from the Center with a Balanced Approach, sponsored by Intelex. My name is Kevin Drewley. I'm an associate editor with Safety and Health magazine and a co-host of the magazine's On the Safe Side podcast, and will be moderating today's session. Thanks for joining us. In a few minutes, we'll start our presentation, but first let's review some preliminary items. The views of today's speakers and organizations are their own and may not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not necessarily mean the council or magazine endorses those items. At the end of today's webcast, we'll conduct a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, type your question, and click the send button. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. Any unanswered questions will be forwarded along to today's speakers. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, and we'll let you know more about that after the presentation. This webcast will be archived, so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, please visit safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. Please also know that you can find a resource from Intelex in the chat, which also is located at the bottom of your screen. With that, let's go ahead and get started and introduce our speaker today, Scott Gaddis. Scott serves as Vice President, Safety and Health at Intelex. He leads in building partnerships with key clients and other top influencers in environmental health and safety. Scott is responsible for the engagement of EHS professionals across the globe to provide a platform for sharing information and collectively driving solutions that mitigate workplace loss. Again, we thank you all for tuning into this presentation. Scott, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin. And it is great to have you that have decided to spend an hour with me. I think it's going to be a jam-packed hour. I'm going to talk as fast as I possibly can, but I live in Kentucky. I was born and raised in Kentucky, so you can imagine that I speak a little bit slower than some of you might. But I've spent over 36 years in safety leadership from the shop floor. Uh, with Kimberly Clark all the way through managing operations with Bristol Myers Squibb, and I'll share a little bit about that. But maybe what I would tell you is I've been around for a long, long time, and I've seen something over and over again, a debate, usually on LinkedIn or at a conference that I attend, and there's these divisions, right, in our own profession between safety one and safety two. And I think today I'm not here to convince you to pick a side. I'm here to help you lead from the center. And I hope that that's where I can land, or at least maybe have you think about blending the strengths of both of these things we call safety one or safety two to create what I think is a safer and a more resilient uh, uh, workplace. And when I think about that, this is not theory to me, and many times I get sidelined looking at all of the different. This is your true path to safety, and they pick one or the other. I think I'm here to share both sides of that as lessons or maybe a few scars along the way as I was learning how to practice safety in a really effective way. And before we get there, kind of give you some background of who I am. Who am I? I am actually that old, right? When you look up in the top left quadrant of that slide, I started with GE back in 1989. I'm so old that we had to wear ties to work, right? And I was on the shop floor. I was very junior. I cut my teeth on actually working with frontline employees and workers to learn the craft that I actually still do today. So about 5 years with GE, and then I spent most of my career with a company called Kimberly-Clark, and most of it in the paper mills. That happens to be my very first paper mill in Owensboro, Kentucky. I started as a site safety leader, and then ended my career as the global safety and health leader for Kimberly-Clark, almost 20 years, just right about that much time. And then I went into the drug business, so I led Bristol Myers Squibb and the corporate EHS team for Bristol Myers Squibb for another 5 years. I enjoyed my time there, but you can imagine going from paper and consumer goods to pharmaceuticals was much different. And I learned a lot of different aspects of leadership requirements and the changes of how I would lead EHS for that company. So it was a good learning, a lot of lessons shared. Then I took over very briefly a company for about 3 years called Coveris Packaging, plastics packaging. We made dog food bags all the way up to medical grade packaging, all the way over to food and consumer goods. So a lot of learning there in the plastics business. And then for the last 7 years, I've been with a company called Intelex, and we develop and help clients understand management systems digitally through an EHSQ software platform. And I joined because I saw this as a big enabler for doing all the things that we care about today. You can't really have a conversation these days in safety and health without using the words machine learning or artificial intelligence. I was seeing some of these things because I really had data laying everywhere when I was trying to lead those other companies, and I knew technology was an enabler to help me kind of press through some of those things. So that's very quickly. I think it just basically says I've been around a long time. What I would do is I would set the stage this way: is that the safety profession is kind of locked in this philosophical tug of war, and we get a little bit tribal when I go to conferences or when I speak to colleagues. We see them kind of leaning toward one way or the other. There's a boatload of consultants that are trying to drive you down a certain path. On one side, you have Safety One. You know, that's this traditional approach that I really cut my teeth on in my career, is that it's about preventing bad outcomes through things like compliance and controls, root cause analysis, incident investigation, right? It's these foundational blocks of leading safety and health in a very productive way, very structured. You know, I usually find it very disciplined, and if it's done well, it's very highly effective. So there's certainly nothing wrong when I think about Safety One. When I started at Kimberly Clark, this is the way that our safety approach was done. It was purely Safety One, strict compliance, going out and looking for risk and hazards in the workplace, trying to mitigate those. But fast forward, I think as my work advanced, we began to understand the benefits of what we now call Safety Two. We started to value learning from success. We were running learning teams even back in the late 1990s, the early 2000s, and we were asking the front line for their input on how things should actually happen. The energy was incredible, but we also started to notice that there could be a lack of accountability from substandard actions from our workers. And I would say it's simply like this: that almost everything became a free lesson and there was lack of accountability. So I maybe to set the stage for you and maybe give you the answer before I press on, without a strong structure, we sometimes see a lot of process drift, right, and inconsistent practice in how we want to really accomplish safety performance in our organizations. So there's this long struggle that's kind of been happening, and here is maybe that time where, well, maybe neither is the complete answer. Maybe the best leaders know how to stand in the middle, taking structure of Safety One and the adaptability of Safety Two and use it. And that's really what I hope that we can do, you know, today in our time together. What I hope you'll learn today is that Safety One and Safety Two, I don't think they are opposing forces. I think they are very complementary of each other. Understanding both models, I believe, enables safety leaders to use structure and compliance along with adaptability and learning, and putting that together. alongside each other completes a really effective safety strategy. And I'll discuss that maybe in today's terms, but I can tell you that very early on in my career, over 30 years ago, I started noticing that these two things were very, very important in the safety performance that I really desire to have. And I can also tell you, I've never had a bad program. I've had bad years, right? I've had years that I wanted to do better, but overall, I've always been very, very successful. And I think it's because I thought this way very early on when we didn't call it Safety One and Safety Two. I think we also see that there is now, all you got to do is go on LinkedIn to understand that there is an over reliance on a single model, and that creates blind spots. Is that focusing solely on one side of this, right, with rigidity or flexibility, is not really where you want to be. Balanced leaders really prevent the pitfalls of doing this when they work from the center, and I truly believe that when they intentionally blend control and flexibility, things work at a much faster pace, at a better pace, and at a more successful pace. I think that the third thing I would say is culture change. It really is, and it begins with leadership behaviors. As supervisors and leaders, they really play a pivotal role in valuing this dual thinking idea. Is that if we simply go by these old models, I spoke yesterday at VPPA, and I said, "What's your number one, problem in the organization that you work in?" And the number one thing were leadership behaviors. Is that leaders did not act the way that I needed them to act when I'm trying to lead safety in a productive way. And I've heard that literally since I began my career. So asking better questions is a leadership activity. Modeling vulnerability that I'll talk about is a leadership activity. Celebrating frontline insight is an actual leadership activity. So there's a lot of things here that really position leaders to be very effective in blending these two models together. And it creates this thing we call psychological safety. I think technology and metrics are a key enablers of balance. Modern EHS platforms help organizations blend safety one and two, and I'll talk just very briefly about that. But learning all those kind of things really, really important as we kind of stretch forward. But I hope I'll be able to deliver, some of those things to you today. So on the left side of your chart there is a book that I wrote, and I published it late last year. Honestly, I wrote the book because I was looking at LinkedIn, as I've shared. I was on social media, and I was seeing these prolonged discussions between Safety One and Safety Two, and I'm thinking to myself that it's not only that, or no, it's a little bit more of this, depending on what that discussion was. What shocked me was as I was noticing the drift, especially with young professionals, where they were moving to a line of thinking that appeared simpler in one path than the other. So much like I was seeing, how some embraced behavioral-based safety in the early 90s, simply, well, we can just observe and we can give feedback and we can fix the worker regardless to how substandard the work was. Well, we could just fix them, and we all know that just didn't work the way that it was presented. In my book, I really talk about Safety One and Safety Two in the premise of blending these two ideals together, and the rest of the book is really kind of how you do that. So Safety One defines safety in the absence of harm. Now, before you kind of start throwing arrows at me, I know that these are very binary, very simple definitions of Safety One and Safety Two. That alone could be a 2 or 3 hour webinar. So just for the sake of the discussion that we're having today, but these are in premise how Safety One and how Safety Two focuses their work. So we define safety in the absence of harm. We're preventing incidents in the workplace by identifying failures and then applying, corrective actions to those. And then we jump ahead of that, right? And we look for hazards and the risk in those work environments, and we go about mitigating those, right? So in principle, that is really how it works. And of course, we care about compliance and following rules and all those other things. I think Safety Two defines safety as the ability to succeed under varying conditions. And we kind of look at that in the framework of a HOP methodology, right? But we kind of look at it, it studies what can go right, it values adaptability, and it sees people as a source of this resilience. So it helps us uncover the conditions that make success possible on the long term over the global reach of what that program would do. And it tries to replicate that. But without structure, right, it also allows process drift. So it makes regulatory compliance harder to demonstrate when we simply go down that that line of thought. The lesson, I think we need both, right, is that safety one, it gives us the guardrails. Safety two provides us a roadmap to navigate that complexity. So the sweet spot is this intentional integration, not compromise, but a deliberate pairing of the strengths of both of those things. So I think that that's really what I want you to learn, from it. And I think that when I look at that, that is really the genesis of really the work that I wrote last year. I think when I look at why the debate falls short between the two, some of you that are younger will not know what this is, but this is the Bradley curve, right? It's been around since the 1990s. It was a model that was produced by, oh, we got a poll question. Well, let me go ahead and do that poll question first. Sorry about that to the administrator of this, but hey, we got a poll question. Where do you lean in your safety approach? Kind of a single choice. Primary safety one, primarily safety two. I blend both intentionally. I'm still exploring, right, both approaches. If you could just take a moment and answer that poll, it will help me go forward. And Kevin, I'm not sure I can see the results. Can you see the results on your side? Oh, there they are. Thank you so much, Kevin.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
so there they are. I appreciate that. So I can see many of you are doing exactly what I'm going to talk about. Maybe it's you're trying to validate your program through me. I don't know what that is, but about 55, about half of you, a little over half of you, I'm blending both very intentionally. So that's a great thing, I think. Primarily safety one, 23%, primarily safety two. I'm going to guess, right, that you joined this webinar to say, well, where should I go? Then I'm still exploring. So I I'm not at all surprised by that poll, but thank you for answering that. That gives me, some runway to talk about. So for some of you, right, we'll validate some of this thinking with this. This is it's called the Bradley curve. It was certainly published by DuPont back in the 1990s. The problem with safety one and safety two, the debate is it's framed like a choice, right? As I've talked about, and that you must pick a side. When safety one dominates, success gets measured by what didn't happen, right? Or if it did happen, we can investigate and get to a conclusion, further mitigating, right? So it doesn't happen again. Safety two, it dominates, right? When we embrace adaptability, when we learn from things, but then it creates risk drift, so to speak. So why take sides? The truth is each model, they just cannot do what the other can, right? So that's the genesis of this. So if we overlay, the two models onto the Bradley curve, I think it makes a lot of sense. It shows a progression from reaction to dependent to independent to interdependent, and then this pattern really starts to emerge. And I've started using this a lot in a lot of sessions that I speak about, and I wrote about it in the book actually, because a lot of young practitioners, well, they're not even aware that this is a model, right, or they forgot about it. And what's happened is a lot of, especially consultants and academics, well, they've produced these more elaborate, what I would say, complex models, and I don't think it's necessary. So if we look at the way that culture happens according to the Bradley curve, and if we overlay, safety one and safety two across the Bradley curve, it shows in the reactive stage is that, well, just safety is not understood, right? Moving to dependence, safety one, like principles like enforcement and rules and procedural control, they are absolutely essential in that dependent stage, right? So stage two, safety one, I think is still dominant, but I've kind of put a red line, along that Bradley curve, because even if you're running a very compliant organization, right? There's this moment in your journey, we start to realize that I've got to have input, I've got to have participation, right, from the workforce if I really want to move toward a more mature culture. So that's what I've represented in that red line. Even in a dependent type of environment where they're coming to you and asking you for the answer to many, many things, you've been able to dislodge some of that function, and you're starting to include, right, more people in leading safety and health, or at least participating in safety and health. So that's what that red line is that late in that stage, you started to recognize that there's more to do. And so that's what moves you over, right, to an independent stage where individuals are really taking more ownership. This is where Safety Two's emphasis on adaptability, on resilience, on learning from success really starts to accelerate your improvement. So it's a great thing. It's where we start seeing better participations. It's where we start asking, right, employees and workers to join us in inspections and auditing, or to lead a training class, right, or to report, when things are happening on the machine floor, or on the construction site, or during a service activity. Finally, in this interdependent stage, this goal of high performing organizations, both models are just really, really resonant, and they operate together in a very active way. So Safety One, it's providing this discipline with structure that we absolutely need. And then Safety Two is delivering this flexibility and shared responsibility, and that sustains long-term performance. So the curve shows us it's not about abandoning one thing, right? Safety One for Safety Two. It's about knowing which levers to pull at each stage of your cultural maturity. And I'm telling you that, from my experience, it is not one or the other. And maybe just to kind of, if you're not familiar with the Bradley curve, I'll just kind of quickly go through this in a minute or two. The reactive safety culture, right? Key challenge: safety is reactionary rather than preventive. Workers deny responsibility. Safety is seen as luck. Management lacks proactive strategies. The funny thing is I asked these questions yesterday at the VPPA conference, and I just said, with a show of hands, can anybody, and I had maybe 150 people in my session yesterday. I said, anybody living in this environment? There were two or three that said, I am living in this environment, right, as a reactive safety culture. They were at a VPPA conference that is all about behavior. It's all about participation and partnership. But I still had two or three that said, I feel that I'm there, right? Now, they may be wanting to learn, and I'm hoping that that's exactly what they were doing. But that's the reactionary stage. I think when we go into the dependent stage, is workers follow a bunch of rules, but they lack intrinsic safety value for them, right? So they are following the rule book, and they're doing what you're telling them to do, but they don't have the value, right, that you do for following those rules. They don't understand why they have certain rules to do things. So regulatory compliance, main driver. Rules and procedures define how we do safety. Management enforces safety through the policy, and rewards and penalizes, right, influence the behavior that they see. So I would say it this way: fear, blame, that is Safety One's dark side. Lack of clarity, that is Safety Two's dark side, right? It's their weak side of things. So when we look at these are somewhat outdated systems, and leaders need to talk about how they model culture in the direction that they want to go. So that's a dependent. And I would say, I asked that question yesterday. How many of you feel that you're still in a dependent driven safety culture? About 30% of them raise their hand and says, I think I'm still there, right? So can you tell me, right, if I ask the question, well, where do you think they would be, Safety One or Safety Two? I would say probably lodged over here in Safety One, and they're not getting the performance that they really want, right? But we do have a path for getting them to go forward. Independent responsibility and safety, very quickly. Individual effort must be channeled, right, into collective improvement. So that's where we do start seeing the influence of Safety Two, when we start putting together learning teams, when you actually want to know what's going well, or what the barriers are that prevent you from having things that go well. So workers take initiatives. We're seeing a lot of accountability, safety self-driven, proactive hazard recognition and mitigation. You're seeing employees that are reporting to you the things that you really need to know. And then finally, and I won't share too much about this, is the interdependent safety culture, is that the key challenge to this is sustaining engagement and ownership at all levels of the organization. So you can see absolutely where safety to methodology and idea comes into this, is that it's a shared responsibilities. We're going to collaborate. We're going to put together teams for continuous improvement. Leadership and workers, we're working together, right? We put our genes on the very same. And then compliance and culture are both very imperative in driving success in an organization that believes this way. So I really think the Bradley curve does it really, really well. So kind of defining those stages, and I don't know if you can see this. It depends on how big your laptop is, maybe. But this is a way, and I'll share the slides with you. So please just let me know that you'd like to have them. But I think this chart off to the right side gives you a really good indicator of, am I living in a safety one environment? Am I blending into safety two? Am I totally safety two? Right? It kind of gives you an idea. The prevailing opinion, loss producing incidents are just a regular part of my job. Right. Well, if you believe that, you're below safety one nor safety two. Right. Dependent, I acknowledge that there's some loss producing incidents that should be minimized mainly to meet my external expectations. You're probably in a compliant workforce. Right. But if you get over to interdependence, a prevailing opinion is we share everything, right? We are collaborating, we are operating for the success of the whole, not just the individual. Well, that probably tells you that you lean toward, more of a safety two idea in your organization. So moving toward interdependence, it really isn't automatic, right? There are just some really big barriers. And being stuck fervently in one camp or the other, it just simply will not get you to where you want to go. And I think at least you should. You want to be in this idea of an interdependent culture where we're collaborative, where we're looking at things together, where we're owning the safety and health system together. So fear of blame, that stifles learning. Siloed thinking between departments, that stifles your ability to have success. Outdated systems, it will not promote or support adaptability in what you want to do in safety. And then leaders who say that safety is important but don't model it, it kills it. Right on either side of this, it really kills it. So the key to removing barriers, I think, between both safety one and safety two, it means that we can start removing these lines and moving more toward the center of what makes sense for your organization. So as I kind of look at overcoming the barriers to growth, moving toward interdependence, as we talked about, it's not automatic. You got to really work at it. And moving organizations that remain stuck in a dependent stage, you're going to be in safety one. That's where you'll stay for a long, long time. Over reliance on safety teams instead of sharing that responsibility will push you back, right? If you're on a safety team that even believes in the safety two concepts, but you're not progressing the way that you want to, it's because the organization is still much too dependent on a central team or over a reliance on you to be their answer. Somehow you're going to have to build capability in the workforce to take that work away from you. And then I think moving to interdependence requires cultural maturity. It means you're going to have to take risks, right, with the organization, and really kind of define what level of risk that you're willing to take to move that organization forward. So this is another slide that I use quite often. Before I kind of talk about, safety one and safety two in practice, let me just step back and look at the environment that you may live in, that I lived in as a safety leader. And that's culture, is that every organization has corporate culture. Whether you've written it down, right, or not, you have corporate culture. It's the moral, it's the social, it's the behavioral norms based on these shared beliefs by this collection of people. It's their attitudes, it's the perceptions of its people in that organization. That overarching culture drives how we get business done. That overarching culture drives how successful we are going to be as a company or an organization. And safety happens to be one dimension of that. Now, there's always somebody out there that says, well, there's no such thing as safety culture. Maybe it's my age. but I try to do things in a very simple way. So I call it safety culture. And when I talk about it, it's a granulation right below what the corporate culture is. It refers to our collective values, our attitudes, our competency, our perceptions, and the patterns of behaviors and groups within an organization, right? About safety, right? These factors can also really influence an organization's commitment and its proficiency in managing health and safety, as well as the style in which they approach it. So that's a really important part of this is that a granular version of corporate culture is safety culture. You also have a quality culture. You have a maintenance culture, right? You have all of these different granulations of culture within the organizations that you work with. But let me talk about it this way, right? What I really think makes culture alive, and what I really think that really pushes it right to the level that you really desire it to be, is to look at the aspects of culture. So there's these situational aspects, what the organization has. This includes your formal systems, procedures, and structures that are in place. It's the safety one's discipline, right? And the safety two's adaptability to work all of these things together. So they are the things I often say it this way. They're the things that you see when you get to work at 6 o'clock in the morning and you leave at 6 p.m. at night. They don't change very often, but they are the structures, the organizations, the rules that you have to deal from, right? To lead your organization forward. Now, many people say, what's that got to do with culture? It's the same debate that we got into. Well, you can make an employee safe regardless of what terrible work environment that they are in. I don't think that's true. I think you can work with them on an emotional level to keep them safe for a period of time. I don't know if that's a day, a month, or a year, but somewhere over time, if you have somebody that's working in an unsafe, a substandard environment, there is a big chance that you're going to suffer loss, right? So situational aspects are very important in how I think about the organization that I'm working in. And I think employees see that very rapidly, right? Is that do they really care if they are putting me in a substandard work environment? That next element are the behavioral things, right? And we talk about these quite often. It's what people do. It's where behavioral and feedback generated from. These are these observable safety actions, hazard reporting, PPE use, procedural compliance. It's where safety one processes can really reinforce commitment to safety, and where safety two can start to elevate our thinking about what culture is in reality. And then third thing there, and we often don't talk about this at all, is the psychological aspects. It's what people feel. It's how they feel about things. It's the safety climate. It's trust in the organization. It's my perception of leadership commitment and their care. It's my willingness to speak up without having a lot of fear in the things that I'm going to say. Safety two practices flourish here, right? Because there's trust, and there's this idea that I'm not going to be hit on the head, right? When I say something that's not positive, right? So we're having very open and honest conversations because it's about what? It's about engagement, and it's about psychological safety where I feel safe, to say things and to talk about things that would not normally be talked about. So I think what I would do here is that, Kevin, let's go to that next poll if you don't mind. So what do you think the biggest risk in relying on one safety model? Do you think workers become disengaged and silent, or accountability gets lost or diluted? The system becomes rigid and brittle, or you miss real improvement opportunities. How would you answer that one? Wait a few seconds here, get our results. Da, 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 da. Wow, that's amazing. So yeah, you miss real improvement opportunity. I think I would have answered that the very same. Following behind that, the system does become very rigid and brittle if you just pick one safety model. So great answers, but I totally agree. Is that you just really miss improvement opportunities if right you just kind of go down one path or the other. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you for that answer. Well, let's kind of press on. I told you that I was fairly an older, safety professional, but I still remember learning from Dan Peterson, and I would tell you, I want to acknowledge him as someone who really shaped a lot of my thinking. But long before Safety One or Safety Two was part of our vocabulary, Peterson was writing about the idea that bridged the two. So I didn't make this up. It's not from Scott Gaddis's notes. It's from me looking at past right academics and practitioners and saying, well, they really had this really correct. So in his books, and I would tell you to buy these books if you don't have them. Techniques of Safety Management is one that I keep on my shelf, and Human Error Reduction and Safety Management is the other. And he emphasized that safety is both a science, right? It's this technical side that we do, and it's a relationship, which is exactly how you answer that poll. So Peterson argued this is culture and leadership are inseparable from safety performance. Inseparable. It's the same thing that I heard from that conference yesterday when they told me my leaders are not involved and I don't have the performance that I want. They're inseparable. Leadership has to be lockstep in what you're trying to do as a practitioner. Workers should be partners. They're not subjects for safety improvement, right? You shouldn't treat them that. That's a command strategy that we used a long time ago in Safety One, but now it doesn't work very well, and I'll explain that in a minute. And then system design, not just individual learning or the behaviors determine outcomes. Right. So he was really talking about Safety One and Safety Two. And these are the principles that we're talking about today. Safety One and Safety Two, the sweet spot is that you'll get the culture and the performance that you want. Because he understands structure and discipline, and he understands how to associate engagement and learning into the process of making sure that we could get to the performance that we really desire. So let's kind of go forward here, and here's how I think you can improve today, right? So kind of looking at what I would say 6 different strategies that you could really just start. Is this first one is a dual lens learning strategy, is to combine root cause analysis with a learning team, and I'll talk about that. Strengthen investigations by exploring both what failed and what could have succeeded, and then promote a double loop learning for deeper involvement. So explain how traditional investigations identify causes, but they often miss the contextual reasons of what could have gone right or what the barriers were that were in front of you that created all of these things to happen. So learning teams really fill that gap. So I would suggest implementing both after a high potential incident or a high potential near miss, or even a successful event, what went well, right? As we did a very complicated lockout tagout process. I think it strengthened investigations by exploring both what could have succeeded, but using traditional root cause to identify where the breakdowns were, and then turning those activities into learning activities. So a learning team could go after root cause, but then what are the learnings beside that that we never explore? We simply write down the root cause, and then we simply write down a corrective actions. If you can understand it that way, let's look at the root cause. Why did we select root cause in this area? And then putting together a learning team, then you can understand what your overall resilience and adaptation process would look like to defeat that, right? So it doesn't really happen again, so you can sustain the practice. And then promoting this idea of double loop learning, that really does get you into deeper improvement. Combining methods allows you to kind of question not only what went wrong, but what did go right. And then it allows you to redesign that process for success. I can share a story about a situation that I had that was an incident, and I had an employee that said, "Well, we did a lot of things right, right?" And what they did is that they didn't follow a standard operating procedure, an SJP, that I had, written for a specific job, and it became very complicated. It was a complicated job, but they rewrote it, right? So they revised it without my knowledge, and they basically inserted it into their personal process, but they failed right, to include a couple steps that I just knew were very important for them to follow. So when they brought that all back, to me, and I did notice that this incident, we investigated it, and I was going down this root cause valley, right? But then we got to the point of, well, what went right? Well, we revised the process. Well, I'm not sure that was right until they started explaining why they were doing the work that they were doing. So they didn't get it totally right, but because they thought they were right, we could have a conversation in a very, very safe environment and open that dialogue up. We could open it up to a learning team without putting in a lot of blame. Well, we didn't. We didn't put any blame, but that built trust and it surfaced these insights that me thinking I was right was wrong. Right. So I learned from that process. They learned from the process. And at the end of the day, we just decided that let's just make this process more robust. So dual lens learning means that I'm just going to stay open to what I hear and just fix the process going forward. I think strategy two, at least for me, is coaching your supervisors. I've always thought that there is a big pivot between the front line and the senior leaders of an organization is your supervisors, right? Is that they are really this bunch that are the cultural translator of safety in your organization. So training them to ask better questions, I think it fosters trust. I think it invites honesty, and it really improves your idea of early risk intervention, right? You can detect things, I can intervene very, very quickly, and kind of give you an idea here is that shifting the command idea to curiosity, right? Coaching supervisors to ask, well, what's making this difficult today, right? What's making this task difficult for you to do? And that opens the dialogue for hearing a worker tell you, right, what is really wrong with the process. So asking those type of questions, what's really making this difficult to do? What's jeopardizing your safety when you do this task? And then I think supervisors modeling safety culture every day is really important. So this behavior, it really does shape even safety one, right? So it shapes how we apply rules. It shapes how we follow things. It shapes how workers feel safe about bringing up things that are not popular or things that you may not want to hear. And then early questions, I think in this category, right, it uncovers a lot of hidden things that we don't know. So inquiry based conversations, if we can change a supervisor for simply telling to asking, that gives us an idea of what weak signals the safety process is giving us before an incident occurs, right? So I think a really important part of this. These could be 20 strategies. I just picked 6 because I think they're simple for you to employ. Strategy 3 is holistic measures. I want to emphasize this. I don't believe that lagging indicators alone tell a complete story. So I think you do have to include leading indicators that measure culture and participation. But I would say this, that balancing lagging and leading indicators, I think it's where you should be. Is that I've been told a long time, and I've had a lot of colleagues and other speakers tell me you should only focus on leading indicators. And I've always, my pushback to that is that I'm okay with that. But at the end of the day, if my leading indicators are good, right? If they're the right leading indicators, there should be a natural reaction in a positive direction to my lagging indicators. Now, we could talk about this in a bell curve fashion that, well, it's going to get worse before it gets better. But in the long run, things should get better. If my leading indicators that are based on the programs that I am influencing across an organization are good, then we're going to hurt less people. We're going to have less downtime, all of those things that matter, right? So I think balancing leading and lagging indicators is a good story to tell. I think measure what drives culture, right? Don't just measure culture. I did an observation. Now here's my feedback. I would measure different things. I would measure things like field level engagement. How did we do on the safety survey? That really starts to tell you what the health of safety culture like in a different package, right? So I think that's an important thing. And then use metrics to tell the story. I think that's it, not the score. It's a really important part here is holistic data informs strategy. That's really what we're trying to do here. It fosters accountability in certain areas, and it inspires what I would say improvement, not just compliance. So if we can blend them both, I think it tells a different story if we're eloquent enough to share it in a proper way. I think the fourth one there is modeling vulnerability, is that vulnerability adds credibility, and it's one of the hardest things for me to do because I do tend to think I'm right about a lot of things, right? And that is our profession, is that we just really cannot be wrong about a lot of things that we're doing. But practice vulnerability, especially in the space where we're trying to blend safety one and safety two, is that when leaders acknowledge, right, their own limitations, it signals psychological safety where everybody has part of this conversation. And I can tell you, I have had those incidents where I've gone into a crew meeting where I said, this is the way we're going to do things, right? Only to have that crew say, well, it's not the right thing, right? And I'm very prideful, right, in those moments is, what do you mean? I get defensive. But what I should do as a leader is saying, well, tell me why you think the way that you do. And many times, right, because they're so close to the risk, they're so close to the work, they do have a better idea. So I need to stay vulnerable, right? Because if I can do that, it signals psychological safety. It signals that this is a safe space where everybody has a comment about how we should proceed with safety. So admitting, uncertainty, it often leads to more collaboration and informed decisions. And I think that's a good thing, because the benefit of this strategy is that it encourages openness and trust. I think that even works on both sides of this dilemma, right, of safety one and safety two. Kind of going forward, strategy five is celebrating positive deviance. I talk about deviance a lot, this normalization of deviance, and I usually talk about it in a negative way, right? Is that we let things slide so long that there's a very negative reaction to it. There's also this other side, right, of positive deviance, is the successful behavior outside of the norm, right? So that's a great thing. So encouraging, identifying these patterns of positive deviance, it elevates, the organization through storytelling and recognition and all those things that really make us as humans want to perform better. So when you see a team that's performing better than you thought that they would, recognize them, that the team has solved this problem creatively, without compromising safety. That's something to celebrate. Positive deviance highlights what's working well and why it's working well. And that third thing is that sharing that, right, creates this motivating, right, arc where that behavior continues. So I think it's a real important thing. And many times as safety professionals, we are there to look at the things that have gone bad, but kind of twist that just a bit, right? And say, well, what's going good in the organization, and be able to share that. And that really does start this momentum of moving from independent culture over to an interdependent culture where we start embracing that and recognizing that. And then basically what I would say here is strategies embedding this dual thinking. I've talked about it, right? Use dual thinking questions to guide leadership and safety committee discussions. For example, what went right? Safety two. Where did the systems fail? Safety one. Those are two questions that you should be asking all the time, right? Not in just safety committee discussions, but I've used them in safety leadership meetings. I've used them on the floor, right? So all of those things are really, really important to understand. The message with that is that really teaches governance, right? It teaches that we're monitoring this entire system together. It's not an audit, right? We're just monitoring this to make sure that we are governing our system in a very, very effective way. I think highlighting both strengths and weaknesses, it really does fuel continuous improvement in the organization. So I don't think you have to look at one or the other. I think just highlighting where your system is strong or where it's weak, it really does fuel continuous improvement. And then I think finally, what I would say is reinforcing psychological safety by framing it as learning and a shared responsibility. I think it's really clear that that's an important part of this. So When I would say that to you, as the audience today, just integrate two questions in your existing meeting platform in your incident investigations to ask those questions much differently and see if you get different answers. And I'm very, very convinced that you will. So let me kind of start closing this thing out. Why does all this matter now? I think that it matters now because there's a tremendous amount of complexity in our work systems. We're dealing with interconnected systems, Industry 4.0, rapid change, technology, unpredictable interactions. So safety one alone, I don't think it can really prepare us for all the unknown unknowns. So I think that that's a really fair statement. We need safety twos. Ability to learn from what's going right, where some of the weaknesses are in the system, and build adaptability in our systems. So I think that that's the first thing that I would say. I say this one is the workforce is changing, is that younger generations, especially Gen Z, want purpose, they want to participate, and they want psychological safety. Right? They want to be in a safe place to work psychologically, mentally. Mental health is very, very important to this group. They expect to be engaged in the process, not just told what to do, what the rules are. They want to be a part of that in a very collaborative fashion. That aligns directly to Safety Two's emphasis on involvement and trust, but it's still needs clarity, right? Which is, of course, over on the Safety One side. I think the third side of this is psychological safety has become fundamental, right? So if people don't feel safe to speak up, risks stay hidden in the environment until it's too late. So Safety Two really kind of helps create that openness to surface those issues very early on. And Safety One ensures that we're structured enough to follow up on those things. The fourth, regulatory and stakeholder pressures, they're not going away. OSHA, ISO 45001, ANSI Z10, these are rooted in Safety One principles. At the same time, right, they start talking about Safety Two type of systems with boards and insurers and investors and looking at ESG measures and behaviors in the system, having safety committees, all of those type of things. That's really where Safety Two really starts to shine. And then finally, the ability to manage risk is now a very strategic responsibility. We really learned that, I think, through COVID, as organizations that can't manage both compliance and adaptability will struggle to keep up. And the ability to integrate both models is just not a nice to have. I think it's imperative that it becomes a competitive advantage in safety performance for your organization. That's why I think this conversation is not just about theory. It's about positioning your safety program to meet today's challenges, those long resilient challenges that you have, and then what you can look forward to going forward. So I'll talk about this just very briefly because I do work in technology now. One of the most powerful enablers for Safety One and Safety Two is technology. And I think you're starting to notice that in a lot of our work in safety and health is think about it. Safety One needs structural, reliable data, things like incident reporting and corrective actions and compliance reports, all of those kind of things. Safety Two, right, is the need to have real time insights about what's getting done. Things like who completed the inspections, where are people going, what's behavior look like in the work system, how many people are attending the training sessions, did they pass the test, all of those things, right, are mirrors between the two, right, different type of approaches. Technology allows us to capture both streams of information, connect it all, and to act on it very, very quickly. So, for example, EHS Software, which is a company that I represent, we log a lot of information. Mobile tools allow the front line to report hazards, to report near misses or successes in the moment of their work. No delays, no bottlenecks. It allows connection between the two groups, and that's very cultural, right? That's a cultural enabler. And then we can use analytics and dashboards to turn all of that raw data into trends. Then we on top of that, right, and even use AI and predictive analytics to detect where drift happens. Do I have, people going to training sessions as they should? What's the blocker? I can start to predict some of that stuff through AI and machine learning. So I think technology is a bridge. This is not a technology webinar, so I won't go any further than that. But I do want you to kind of understand is that the roadmap to balance safety. I think it's awareness, educate leadership, educate your front line that both Safety One and Safety Two have a part in what we're doing here. Ensure that everybody understands that it's not just about the mechanics, but it's about the why, behind the approach. I think activating it is phase two. Pilot some of these blended practices in targeted areas. If you have a team that's performing well, maybe try some different things. Pair traditional root cause analysis with a learning team and see how that works for you. Balancing lagging and leading indicators in one department scorecard. See how that works for you. So activate it. Start as small or as big as you think you should. I think the third phase there is amplification. Take what works from the pilots and roll it out across the organization. So start small but get big, and then share those success stories very widely. And you'll start getting the motivation. You'll start getting the value buy-in that you're looking for. And then the big thing here is always sustainability. Is build these practices into the system so they're sustainable. You've got to be able to do cultural reviews. You got to be able to track compliance and cultural indicators. It's not a quick fix, staying in one lane or the other or blending them both. This is really cultural evolution, right? That's really how you should look at it. But the benefit is the safety system that is both predictable, right, as we look at in Safety One, and it's adaptable as we really kind of go after in Safety Two, right? So I think it's a really collective, good story for you to be able to tell. So as I conclude in my last 5 minutes, I think leading for people, not. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I got another question. I'm glad Kevin is on the line here. So yeah. So let me ask this last question, then I'll finish up. Where can technology best support a balanced Safety One or Safety Two approach? We all have Jeopardy music. And there they are. So integrating incident and learning data. I think that's probably how I would have was answered that too. I think, from a technology side of this, we always hear about dashboards for compliance and culture metrics. That's mostly from leaders wanting to understand versus just a safety team. But I don't disagree with it. So I think that those are all really, really important answers to those questions. So I appreciate that. I think technology really can affect those top three there. So let me finish up because I've got about 3 minutes to do it. We talked a lot about strengths of Safety One, the strengths of Safety Two, and the risk. I hope I've been able to demonstrate of leaning too far in one direction. We looked at strategies and tools and examples how to blend, or how I at least think that you can. Now let's bring it all together. There's a core ideal that I do want you to leave with, is that leading from the center, it's not a compromise. It's a very deliberate choice in how you lead your program. It's the point where the discipline of Safety One ensures consistency and compliance and risk control, and the adaptability of Safety Two ensures you're engaging, that you're learning from things that have happened, that you're learning before things happen, and that you're very resilient, right? So all of those things are very good. In the center, control and creativity work together. And that accountability and trust reinforce each other. And that's really what I want to leave you with, is the accountability and the trust. They really reinforce each other, and your people have both the protection of a strong system that you've put together in your organization, and the confidence that it can adapt to new conditions as they change going forward, because they will change. You've noticed that. And this is where your culture really becomes sustainable. It's not just because it's built on rules. It's not just because it's built on goodwill and learning all the time. It's built on balance, right? It's built on a balanced foundation that can stand up today and it can move you forward to tomorrow. So, as you kind of head back to work, I really appreciate you spending the hour with us. I don't want you to think about Safety One or Safety Two as two separate programs. That's the big thing, is that I want you to think about them as two lenses that you can look through, right, at the same time. And your job, I think, as a leader, as a practitioner, is to stay right there in the middle where you have the clearest picture. And I think what emerges is that there are both sides of this that I may need to use for this problem or for this solution. And that's where I'll leave you today. I don't think we really have time for questions, but I would tell you, as I end the webinar, um, that's my QR code for my LinkedIn. If you want to link in with me, have this conversation. I'm always having conversations with colleagues that link in with me. They ask questions. I'll give an answer. Sometimes they don't want that answer, right? But it's at least an honest answer for somebody that's been doing this for a long time. I don't always have to be right, but I love being wrong about certain things. And that comes from you, right? That comes from you having dialogue with me. So I really appreciate that. Kevin, I'll just turn it right back over to you.
All right. Well, excellent. Great job, Scott. Thanks for sharing your insights and your expertise. And while I'm certainly glad to be with you on the line, just want to make sure the true credit for leading the polls goes to Alan Ferguson of the Safety and Health
Oh,
team.
thank you, Alan. I appreciate that.
All righty. No, as you said, we've kind of run out of time for questions, and we apologize for that. But there are some in the queue, as Scott indicated. Please take the time for the QR code, and he's more than happy to reach out or to have you reach out to him and to interact that way. In addition to that, just a reminder, there's going to be that evaluation survey that we're asking you to complete, and that'll open in a different screen after the webinar. And as always, we value your input as it helps us to improve our future webcasts. Once again, thank you for joining us today. That's going to end things for us this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are. As always, we want to thank Scott Gaddis, everyone at Intelex, and all of you who listened in. Thanks and have a great day.